Welcome to the Perkins Coie Emerging Companies video seminar series. This is our third of 6 videos discussing the 6 initial steps necessary to get an emerging company off the ground. Before we get into the substance of our conversation, let me first introduce Perkins Coie. Perkins Coie is an Am Law 100 law firm with approximately 700 lawyers throughout our 13 offices in the United States and 2 offices in China. My name is Buddy Arnheim. I'm the chairman of our firm's Emerging Companies Specialty Group, which is an amalgamation of approximately 80 lawyers that spend most, if not all of their time working with emerging companies. And just to clarify, emerging companies in our minds are companies that are pursuing perishable market opportunities and typically have several similar characteristics. First, they're growing very, very quickly in order to take advantage of that perishable market opportunity. Second, they typically fund their initial product development and market entry with external capital and oftentimes venture capital. And last, these companies are typically built around 2 core assets. First, the human capital that is moving the business forward, and second, the intellectual property around which the business is being built. So today we're going to talk about these startup companies, the emerging companies' relationship with other people, non-founders. In our first seminar, we talked about the formation of the entity. In the second seminar, we talked about the founder's relationship with the entity. And again, today we're going to talk about the relationship of other people in the company. Let's start with an equity incentive plan. Oftentimes, our clients, the emerging companies, use equity as a primary driver to motivate employees and consultants and advisors to move the business forward. And accordingly, they establish a certain amount of the initial capital, they reserve an initial amount of capital for issuance to those people. And in order to do that in compliance with federal and state securities laws, you need to establish a stock incentive plan and have it registered or permitted. Oftentimes, we'll suggest to our clients that they reserve something between 15 and 25% of the initial capitalization of the business in the stock incentive pool. Create a stock incentive plan that allows the issuance of options or stock grants, or at times appreciation rights. Have it permitted with the state in which those options or those securities are going to be issued. I'm based in California, so we often do it under California law. And use that vehicle for issuing stock to these individuals who will be making contributions. Issues that need to be thought through when forming a stock incentive plan, in addition to sort of calculating how many shares you're going to reserve under that plan, include the appropriate vesting schedule. And oftentimes these plans are structured in a way that allows a myriad of vesting, a customization of vesting for any particular grant. Other things to think about, much as we discussed with founder stock, is what happens in the event of a change of control or acquisition of the business during the time that options or equity incentives are being vested. Or what happens if a person who receives equity incentives subject to vesting leaves the business for a myriad of reasons, whether they're fired for cause, without cause, whether they resign for good reason or without good reason, or whether they die or are disabled. All of these issues need to be thought through. There's customary approaches to each of them, and you should talk to your counsel about those and make sure that you think through them before establishing the plan. In addition to establishing the equity incentive pool, many emerging companies avail themselves of the contributions of early advisors and consultants to the business. In fact, many emerging companies establish what are referred to as advisory boards, which is an informal group of people with special potential contributions that they can make to the emerging company. And oftentimes they look at rewarding those people with equity incentives, again, instead of cash. Most of the early stage companies really do not have a lot of cash to expend and prefer to use equity incentives in order to reward people's contributions. Advisory boards are informal entities. They are not akin to a board of directors that are required under state law. Yet, many companies try to put some structure around them. They try to structure it with a specific number of individuals and to define the specific task that those advisors are going to need to make or contribute into the business. We oftentimes see advisory boards assembled with somewhere between 6 and 12 individuals. Expectations are those individuals will provide anywhere from an hour or two a week up to down to maybe an hour or two a quarter, plus the participation when reasonably requested by the company, in exchange for which they receive a modest grant that vests over the duration that the advisor is expected to perform those duties, usually 1 to 2 years. In addition to advisors, a lot of our companies emphasize the involvement of consultants in the early days. In fact, before a company has cash, they oftentimes prefer to involve people as consultants as opposed to employees, so that they do not necessarily need to monitor withholding or FICA or provide benefits that are typically required when you're employing somebody full-time. The delineation between a consultant and an employee is a difficult delineation. I would highly recommend talking with counsel about the feasibility of referring to somebody as a consultant when they're providing full-time services to the company. But again, it is an issue that's worth looking into. Let's also talk a little bit about board composition. Every company requires a board of directors, and if you have only one stockholder, it's okay to have one board member, but oftentimes as a company grows and it involves more people, we strongly encourage them to have at least 2 or more people serving on the board of directors. Being a board member of a company is a real responsibility, and with it comes some personal liability potential, and the obligation to look out for the best interests of all stockholders of the business. Again, this is a topic that can be that is best discussed with counsel. It's an important topic. It's important to pick the right individuals to serve on your board, but those individuals also have to understand the responsibility that they're assuming when they do jump onto the board of directors. Last but not least, let me talk a little bit about intellectual property. In a subsequent video seminar, we're going to talk about intellectual property at length. However, as a prelude to that conversation, it is imperative that the emerging company create very strong IP hygiene from day one. And that means that anybody that's touching the company's intellectual property, and intellectual property is not just patent rights, it's know-how, it's the business plan, it's trade secrets, it's a whole bunch of different things. It's imperative that anybody that comes into contact with the company's intellectual property memorialize that that intellectual property is the property of the company, that that individual is not going to use that intellectual property without the company's consent, and that individual is not going to disclose that intellectual property or elements of it without the company's consent. In other words, confidentiality. Thus, all employees, all advisors, all consultants should be asked to sign some sort of documentation that evidences this cloak on the company's intellectual property. That document is typically referred to as a proprietary information and inventions assignment agreement. We have several samples on our website, which you can click and retrieve at your leisure, and I am sure your counsel would be more than happy to talk you through the nuances in that document. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Buddy Arnheim, and I look forward to talking to you again.